Hi, and welcome to Chapter 1 for Microbiology. In this chapter, we're going to start with an introduction into the microbial world. I'm going to break this chapter up into two videos. You'll see that I try to keep our videos somewhere around 20, 30 minutes max. So if I'm afraid we're not going to get everything in that time, I'll break it up so that you guys can have a chance to take a break, take a little brain break, and so that we're not condensing so much information into one time. Another thing you'll notice with my PowerPoints is I will have a slide with all of the objectives. This is basically stating everything that we're going to cover. I'm not going to read it to you, but what I provide this to you for is this can be like your study guide. So a lot of students always want a study guide. I'm not going to waste my time or yours writing a study guide, but you can use these objectives if that's something that's very helpful to you, and it might be. Then I advise you to use these objectives and answer them, and that can be like your study guide. All right, so microbes. What is a microbe? What is microbiology? Well, a microorganism is an organism that is too small to see. Micro meaning small, right? So it's a small organism. It's something that's too small to see with an unaided eye. And that's where the word microbe comes from. It's just short for a microorganism. That's what we're going to be studying here in this class. Now, microbes aren't all bad. A lot of times we think of bad microbes first, but in fact, there's a lot more benefits to microbes than there are harmful effects. And these benefits can include benefits to the ecosystem. So the majority of decomposers are microbes. Without decomposers, we would be in big trouble, right? We need decomposers to break all of the dead living matter down to be reused. Also, microbes are very responsible for performing photosynthesis, particularly in aquatic environments. So without these microbes undergoing photosynthesis, say in the ocean, then we wouldn't have any of the rest of the food chain. Microbes are also very important in industrial processes. So they're important during the production of ethanol, acetone, vinegar, cheese, and bread. They're also important in the production of insulin and vaccines. So they produce a lot of medicines that we take as well, including antibiotics as well. That's not on here. But one of the most important of all is our resident microbes. These are microbes that are resident, hence that name, on our bodies. So they live on our bodies, and they are very important to keep us healthy. Without resident microbes, then we don't function properly. So resident microbes function in helping us acquire nutrients. So we have microbes that live in our gut. And if we didn't have those microbes in our gut, we would not be able to break down our food, digest it, and get those nutrients out of our food. They're also very important for training our immune systems. We're going to talk about here in a second a little bit more, but without contact with our healthy resident microbes, our immune systems will often not develop properly. And another important part of resident microbes is that they help to keep harmful microbes in check. So our resident microbes compete and fight off these harmful microbes. Now, resident microbes are not found throughout our entire body, only in certain areas. So a couple areas where we do find them most prevalently would be on the skin, also in our gut. We've all heard of that. In a healthy individual, we should not have microbes in what we call our sterile system. So that's going to include the blood, also bone marrow, the brain and cerebrospinal fluid, and also any internal tissues that don't interface with the external environment and interstitial fluids. Then, of course, there are some harmful effects of microbes, including various diseases that are caused by microbes, as well as another inconvenience is the spoilage of food is generally carried out by microbes. So the microbiome, you may have heard this word. You will certainly hear this word a lot as we go throughout this semester. The microbiome is the group of microbes that live stably in the human body. These are those resident microbes we were just talking about. And as we mentioned, they help to maintain good health. They're necessary, in fact, to maintain good health. They prevent the growth of pathogenic microbes. So like I mentioned, they compete with these pathogenic microbes and they fight them off. And they're also important for training the immune system. We're not going to see the same colonization in all areas of the body. So for example, the type of bacteria that's found on the skin is not going to be the same types of bacteria that we find in our gut. So different areas of the body have a different colonization, different types of bacteria, and other microbes that are found in that part of the body. Here's an article. This is optional, but if you're interested, I do highly recommend this article. And in it, they're talking about how important it is and how harmful it is to actually live in a sterile environment. Our culture today has valued a sterile environment, and so that's led to the production of lots of antibacterial soaps. I'm sure you guys have seen them. You may even use them. Antibacterial soaps, antibacterial cleaners, like for your kitchen. But one of the harmful effects of using these antibacterial products is that it's causing the production of resistant microbes or the development of resistant microbes. By killing off large amounts of bacteria, it's going to allow only the resistant microbes to grow. And then that's killing off all of their competition. So that's where we're getting a lot of these resistant microbes from. And as I mentioned earlier, how important it is that we are exposed to various microbes as we are to develop a healthy immune system. And what we're finding is that actually children that are raised in a more sterile environment are more likely to have autoimmune diseases. So it's actually very important that these children, as this article says, let them eat dirt. It doesn't have to be that dramatic, but they should be exposed to lots of different germs, right, or different microbes so that their immune systems develop healthy. So instead of using these antibacterial products, it's suggested that instead you just use regular soap. You can use bleach and other natural cleaning products. This is something for you guys to think about at home. All right, we're going to switch gears here a little bit. We're going to talk about the naming and classifying of microorganisms. So this naming system was developed by Carolus Linnaeus, and he established a system of the scientific nomenclature in 1739. And what he established is that each organism is going to have two names. And then we call that the binomial nomenclature. The first word or name is the genus, and the second name is the specific epithet or the species name. What's important to note is that any organism name needs to be italicized. If it's handwritten, it should be underlined. Also, the genus is going to be capitalized, and the species name is going to be lowercase. You'll see some of these names are descriptive for the organism. It can also honor a scientist. We'll see often that it's named off of where that organism was found, etc. So here's a few examples. So Staphylococcus aureus. I don't have my pointer. There. Here's Staphylococcus aureus here. After you've said it once, you can actually just use the first letter of the genus. So we'll call that S. aureus after that. You do notice that it is italicized. First word or genus is capitalized. The second word or species is lowercase. So this is the appropriate way to say or to write out Staphylococcus aureus or S. aureus thereafter. A couple more examples. So these are two pictures of Staph aureus here. Sorry, before we move on. This is a plate. This is what you see with your eyes. We're going to see this in lab. And then here is magnified a lot. Escherichia coli or E. coli after that. That's actually named after this guy. Coli comes from where it's found. So it's found in the intestines. Streptococcus pneumoniae. Here's another example. Streptococcus is named after the arrangement that we see. We're going to talk about more about that later. And pneumonia, this, as you can probably guess, is responsible for lots of different pneumonia. Not all pneumonia, but. All right, moving into categorization. So there's 3 domains of life. You've probably been exposed to this at some point in Gen Bio class. We have bacterial domain, Archaea, and Eukarya, right? Eukarya, these are the guys that have the nucleus. And we're going to be talking about quite a bit of eukaryotes that are microbes. We also have Archaea. So these are prokaryotic. They live in extreme environments. And we're not going to be talking about these too much. We're going to touch on it today and not talk about it much after that. Because we don't really see a lot of Archaea that cause human disease, which is a large chunk of the focus of this class. And then we also have bacteria, which is going to be a huge part of this class. And these are prokaryotes as well. So types of microorganisms. So we have bacteria. Remember, that was its own domain. Here's a picture of bacteria here. Archaea, its own domain as well. Fungi. Here's a picture of fungi. Here's protozoa. Algae. These 3 are all different types of eukaryotes. So these are all can be microbes. And we have viruses. So what domain do viruses belong in? Well, they actually don't belong in any of those 3 domains because it's questionable whether viruses are really alive. That's my opinion. Different scientists have different opinions on that. So that is something that's readily argued, is whether viruses are considered alive or not. But they are generally not placed into one of those 3 domains. And lastly, we're going to talk about some of the multicellular animal parasites. Let's go through each of those. So first, bacterium or bacteria. So if we're just talking about one bacterial cell, we're just talking about one of these guys, that's a bacterium. Generally, we're not just talking about one tiny little bacteria cell, so we're usually going to use the word bacteria. Just so that you are aware if you see those 2 words. That's what this is singular, this is plural. I'm not a stickler for that kind of stuff, so don't worry. Just so that you're aware. Again, bacteria are prokaryotic. They're also unicellular. They have peptidoglycan cell walls. That's something important. Maybe I'll put a star there. They reproduce through binary fission. And they utilize different energy sources. So they can utilize organic chemicals, inorganic chemicals. They can undergo photosynthesis. And so what I mean by this is that some bacterial species are going to do one of these and some bacterial species will do others. So some will utilize organic, some will utilize inorganic, some can do photosynthesis. Archaea. So these are prokaryotic, also unicellular, but they don't have peptidoglycan in their cell walls. As I mentioned, they live in extreme environments. Our body is not an extreme environment. It's quite the opposite, in fact. That's why we don't really see a lot of archaea that inhabit the human body. Some examples of these extreme environments can be these deep sea vents that we see here. So this has very high pressure, very high heat, and chemical conditions, but archaea can live there. Quite the opposite when it comes to temperature. We actually have some archaea that live in ice. That's what we're seeing here. This yellow color is the sulfur that's produced by those archaea. Different types of archaea can include methanogens, extreme halophiles, so they can live in very salty environments. Extreme thermophiles can live in extreme temperatures. Next, we have the fungus or fungi, is plural. These are eukaryotic. Remember, again, eukaryote means that it has a nucleus, has membrane-bound organelles, right? Here, the fungi have chitin cell walls. They absorb organic chemicals, so that's where they get their energy from. It's from organic chemicals. There's two types. There's molds, and mushrooms are multicellular. So this is because they're multicellular, they're going to get to be the size where we can visibly see them. And these visible masses are called mycelia. And those are composed of filaments called hyphae. So this would be like one hyphae here, because it's like a filament. Yeasts, on the other hand, are unicellular. So they're not going to group together to be multicellular. Instead, they're unicellular. Protozoan or protozoa, which is plural. Also eukaryotes. They're very highly diverse. So some of them are more plant-like, some of them are more animal-like. They also have very complex life cycles. We are going to talk about several of the protozoa life cycles when we get there later in the semester. These guys absorb or ingest organic chemicals, and they're quite often motile. So they might have a pseudopod, cilia, or flagella to allow them to be motile. Algae. These are photosynthetic eukaryotes. They're very diverse. They have cellulose in their cell walls, just like plants do. They can be found in fresh water, salt water, and even in the soil. They can be unicellular or multicellular. So that's what we're seeing here, some unicellular, multicellular organisms. And they can produce sexually or asexually. So lots of variety here as well. And we have our multicellular animal parasites. So these are, of course, eukaryotes, multicellular, they're actually animals. And we're going to call them helminths. So helminths, think worms when you think that. So they're parasitic flatworms or roundworms. So I do want you to know that word helminths, okay? So that you know what I'm talking about when I say that word from now on. So we're talking about these worms here, okay? Now, you may be thinking, I can see these with my eyes, so are they really microbes? And yes, they do get categorized as microbes, and they are often talked about in microbiology classes. And that's because there's certain stages in their life cycles that are microscopic. So these worms may produce eggs or cysts that those would be microscopic. Okay, and so then now we can categorize them as a microbe. And it's often these eggs that are ingested. That's why we don't see them when we ingest them. And lastly, we have our viruses. Viruses are my favorite. Viruses are acellular, so they're not considered to be an actual cell Viruses do not undergo metabolism, which is generally considered a requirement for life. What viruses do consist of is a DNA or RNA genome inside of a protein coat. They may or may not have an envelope outside of that protein coat. And viruses are going to require a living host cell to replicate. They do not have their own replication machinery, so they're going to have to use a living cell to replicate themselves. All right, we're going to take a break here, and we're going to pick up. We're going to talk about, go through a little bit of history, microbiology history when we come back. See you guys in a little bit.